And now that the Fourth Plenum has concluded, what's next for China? What key messages on policy and personnel came out of the meeting? We sat down with retired Brigadier General David Stilwell, former defense attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, and former Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs for insight. General Stilwell, thank you so much for joining us. Always great to have you back on the show.
Back so soon.
Well, there's a lot of eyes on the Fourth Plenum, which has now concluded. So far, all the reports are saying, the main message coming out is that the Chinese regime will focus on speeding up self-reliance in science and technology. Of course, that comes after President Trump's threats to cut off any and all critical components in that sector. What do you make of this? How will the Chinese regime do that?
Well, reading the 5,000-word summary from the PRC side, it basically says we're going to fix everything. As you said, the one that I think stood out to most people is this idea of self-reliance on tech, but really no recipe that I could see on how to do that. How do you empower people and markets and all those innovative forces that what made Western technology development so quick. Up to now, when you say innovate in China, again, in my opinion, it generally means go find the best source in the world and go steal it.
I want to get to the personnel aspect, but on the economic front, because as you predicted, this one seemed to be focused a lot on the economic situation inside China. Of course, it's not been going well at all, but normally that's something focused on in the third plenum. So what was different about this year's plenum?
They talk about raging storms and headwinds. Of course, they're referring to not just the U.S., but the world resistance to a system that overproduces, a command economy, which by definition overproduces because it doesn't respond to market forces, supply and demand. It responds to a top-down direction to build more and create more, even though there's no market for it. So what do? They dump it on Europe and the U.S. and the rest. And Europe, to its great credit, is fine. No more. We're not going to let you undermine our automotive market and other things. Now they're casting about. I only see two options here. One is you increase, consumption at home, which isn't happening because people are worried about what the future looks like. The economy, yes, it follows the real estate market down the toilet. People are less willing to part with their hard-earned savings rather than more. So consumption can't happen, which means more exports required, and that's not happening either because the world is putting back. Nexperia, that Dutch company that the Dutch nationalized, was a strong signal to the PRC that it's not just the U.S., it's everybody. And they're going to have to deal with this problem instead of just blaming it on one or perhaps punishing one side by cutting off rare earths and all that.
Looking ahead, if you will, we heard President Trump saying just yesterday that he is expecting a long meeting with China's Xi on the sidelines of the APEC summit. He's expecting China to start resuming buying of U.S. soya beans because they did stop, which is hurting our farmers. What do you make of that? Because right now we also have Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Trade Representative Jameson Greer meeting their counterparts in Malaysia to try and hammer out potentially a trade deal. What do you make of all these moving parts happening in Asia?
Just for one, I would be surprised if Xi Jinping shows up on the sidelines of APEC. He's missed almost all of the large meetings that you'd think he would have gone to. If President Trump's at the United Nations General Assembly, you'd think the Chinese leader would want to be there as well to offer his counterpoint. So, and there's been back and forth on whether or not he's going to leave the country or not. The ASEAN Regional Forum and the ASEAN Summit is another opportunity for senior leaders to gather. But what I saw was that they're sending Li Qiang, the Prime Minister, the Premier, versus Xi Jinping. I guess the bigger point is it's unclear as to what the future holds and who's going where and doing what.
I want to dig into that a little bit because it seems markets especially are watching for this trade deal. Everyone's calling for a trade deal. But if we look at the past, Communist China has a history of not keeping its promises, especially with trade deals. So if there is a trade deal this time, how would or how should the U.S. ensure and enforce it that actually China follows through this time? Or is there a way to get Beijing accountable?
In April of 2019, we finally hammered out, after steadily increasing tariffs, finally got the PRC's attention, and our interlocutor, Liu He, signed off on a very meaningful trade agreement that had verification regime. If you do not follow through, we will then take the following actions. And we thought we had a deal. I remember everybody was celebrating that. he took it back to Beijing, and Xi Jinping said, not a chance. I am not going to put myself in a position where I agree to penalties for not following through, because here's the quiet part, I don't intend to follow through. I'm only going to do this for the appearance of being a reliable, trusting partner while doing the opposite. I can't see how it happens other than a major change in their policy. And the 15th five-year plan doesn't show anything like that. It just basically says we're going to keep doing what we're doing.
Well, definitely a lot to look out for here. General Stilwell, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tiffany. See you.